I'm here to present this debate called The Future of the Industry, where we will speculate a little bit, look a little bit in the famous crystal ball, and going to talk a little bit about the future, what it will look like and how to get there. With me through this phenomenal debate that I hope it will be, I have Susan Cummings, CEO at 106 Games with 30 years in the industry, co-founder of 2K Games and also Tiny Rebel Games.
That just makes me old, that's all.
She will debate versus Mr. David Higley, partner at Pernilla Weinberg, who has 25 years working with game studios and with a global head of media and entertainment with a past as managing director for investment banks. So you can guess that our very first topic will be investment. But first of all, please present yourself a little bit more and with one word, describe how you feel about the future in the games industry.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Optimistic. I'd like to say as hell, but we'll just say optimistic since I was told one word.
I would say, well, I mean, we're supposed to disagree, but
I made that hard on you.
yeah, you did. I think of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. I'm not sure that's optimistic. It's just, we're not going away, but, things twist and turn, and we've seen that.
Yeah.
That one, don't panic, 2 words.
Okay. Don't panic. I like it though. So on topic of investment has pretty much dried up for most of us in the games industry as of late. It's getting harder and harder to get any sort of VC capital for your pitch. And so the question is, will investment return? Should it return? Are games even investable? And if so, how should investors do it differently this time around to be successful and sustainable?
You want to go first? I feel like
Well, there's been, I used to say there were a lot of fun ones in venture in video games and not a lot of fun twos. I think during COVID, we saw really an acceleration of fun one and fun two because capital was deployed so quickly. I mean, it was a moment of time between 2020 and 2022, just hyperactivity. And I think no one knew what was going to happen. We've never been through this before, but it was kind of the perfect storm for games because everybody was driven inside, which meant they were playing games. Capital had been around, but they really, I think, appreciated the opportunity that was going on. It got quickly deployed, and then it got redeployed. And I think we are seeing a situation now where people are looking and saying, what are the returns and things like that. Games, in many ways, is a hit-driven business, many ways like the venture model. And so you do see it is tricky to do. I think one of the things that changed, and we think about investments, and we see activity in this, is games as a service is a little bit different. Even if you look on the mobile side, some of this stuff is leverageable. And I think at some point you're going to see, I would call it more sophisticated financing coming in. Right now, venture is really, hey, I'll fund your enterprise or I'll fund your game. Really, it's even if they're saying I'm funding the enterprise, you're effectively funding the game, and they're just taking an equity piece. So like it's the publisher model it away, but taking the equity piece. But conversely, for a lot of the investors, they really haven't published a game before. They really haven't developed a game before. They may be an avid game player, but it's very different to be an avid game player and actually making games. I love playing games. There's no possible way I could do what she does. I know that,
Yeah, I might, I don't even know if this is like the counterpoint to this. I might go so far as to say, I don't know if there's a traditionally investable space in video games right now, which is a horrible thing to say as a startup that's, raising money, always raising money. My take on this is that the industry is very bipolar once again. And we've been there before, but more so than ever. So at the one end of the spectrum, we have the AAA guys who have to compete with Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty, hundreds of millions of dollars. And these companies raised from VCs a few years ago, and they were told they were going to raise a seed round and then a Series A round and a Series B round, and they would launch. And it breaks my heart because I know a lot of these founders because they couldn't. They got to Series A, they hadn't shown any metrics yet, and they're like, go find a publisher. So they went and got the same publishing deal that they would have gotten anyway, and they also gave up a huge chunk of their company because nobody has the stomach to get them to market. So publishing has become this lost art. We do need publishers because they're the ones who can get it to market. So I don't think that's an investable space anymore. I don't think the Riot spin-outs, the big hockey stick things, stay away. But that means at the other end of the spectrum, we have the indie guys. And everyone will tell you, oh, it's not investable. They're going to put your game on Steam. There are 20,000 games on Steam. Where's the venture scalability? And so I think we just really need to course correct what the hell we mean by venture investment in games. We need to look at building real businesses, smaller businesses, businesses that figure out their viability as early as possible before they scale and generate revenue. Because look, I love a lot of the people in games VCs. I don't want to throw any of that under the bus for my own personal sake. But I think it's high time that we stop letting the game VCs tell us what our business is about. I'm tired of asking them for acknowledgement or approval of what I'm doing. We're game developers, right? And it's time we took our industry back.
Okay, I like that. I have one question though. We mentioned the gold rush earlier with after COVID, where everyone was at home, and suddenly all these VCs, also the non-endemic, the non-gaming investors came to the space and started just putting money into almost anything. And then suddenly, lo and behold, not everyone can make a live service game, so you get a critical mass of players. Who would have calculated that? And so. Was that the problem? How much damage has these potential, non-endemic investors done to the game? Should they stay away, or do we need them, or should they come back? Thoughts?
I go first.
You go first this time.
I don't think we need them back. I guess that's the answer. I think it's done a lot of harm to our industry. I think that valuations got so out of hand. And people were spending. Look, these are things we should know. I take responsibility. I had a studio for 16 years that eventually became 25 people. I was one of that 2% of women who raised a lot of money a few years ago. And all the lessons that I knew, all the things I knew about validating, about keeping it small, it just got thrown out of the window because everyone said there'll be more money coming, and you got to be fast, and you got to, build critical mass, and then you get your next valuation and all of that. And we needed this course correction, and that really sucks to say because I had to lay off a lot of people. Not as many as many people did, but we needed to course correct. I think that we need these small teams, and I think all of these non-game folks coming into the industry, as much as I'd love to see them love our industry. And look, a lot of us were there when none of them wanted to touch us. Like 10 years ago, there was hardly a VC that would touch our space. And, other than maybe like Kleiner Perkins, and that was it. And I got laughed out of VC offices back when I lived in LA. And it was really exciting and sexy that all of a sudden they liked us and wanted to talk to us and stuff. But, the mobile space dried up, right? They understood mobile because you don't have to understand games to understand the mobile business. It's like, okay, here's your metrics. I put more money into the bucket, and this is what comes out. And that's just the science of mobile games. And I think that they all understood that. But the problem with content, with big AAA and original IP, is that how am I going to pick? Well, that's being a publisher. And so they kind of tried to turn into publishers. And that's a really hard business. That takes years and years of expertise. And I kind of think the investable space now is publishers. I think that these VCs should be pouring money into publishers and getting them to pour money back into developers and incubate and build and rebuild our industry.
Well, I think the counter to that is I really, part of it is then you're dependent on the publisher. So I've seen many developers that have had great ideas and publishers, and Fortnite was passed by EA, I think it was. And, there are games out there that never saw the light of day because the publisher went like this and said, yeah, I don't like it, or whatever it is. Now, maybe they're informed, maybe there's a reason, maybe they save people from spending time, but, I think part of it is, where should the gatekeeping happen? We've seen this in music, and we've seen this, look at the music. I think being able to go directly to consumer from a creator perspective, I'm not the creator, from a creator perspective, it's quite powerful rather than having the gatekeeper. I think on the other side, maybe there was value, as you're saying, to the publisher, but there's always going to be a lot of failure. I mean, if you look at venture or you look in just in general, I think it's like 1 out of 9 companies, 1 out of 10 companies make it. So you've got to accept there's a level of breakage. I think on the other side, would you, as a content creator, would you rather have the shot from capital that's available versus trying to go to the publisher and banging your head about this idea? I mean, there's great Brian Fargo, I'll use the name, I love Brian, and he had Wasteland, and for years and years and years he had talked about it and people said do it, and he finally did a Kickstarter campaign and said, if you want me to make the game, I'll make the game, and he got the funding to do it. He said it was incredibly stressful because you have all this pressure from all these fans, to really make a good game, but that's another one, and maybe that's another area of,
I think it's a great model. I love that. Yeah. And I've had that conversation a bit this week. I think there's a Patreon model in video games. Like, let's get the fans supporting this stuff. They're there on Steam. They just want great games. Like, look at Balatro. I wouldn't have signed Balatro back in 2K. Who the hell would have? And they, they proved it, and they did it cheap. But, what I know what you're saying, and having been a publisher, I get it. When I was at 2K, we were one of the only publishers out there who were letting developers have their IP, and this is going back 15 years. When I signed the Borderlands deal, we had a 50-50 deal where if we wanted to walk away from the IP, Gearbox could have it and vice versa. There's a link that Mark Delora pointed me to that's analyzed like thousands of game development deals to say like what the status quo is now. Most of them are letting people keep their IP. Like, that's huge. That's a big win. And that wasn't like that back when I was a publisher.
Do you think that's a result of more competition in the market?
Probably, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and so will it stick, if the VCs go away? I don't know, but.
So between these models we've spoken about, publishers, VCs that are, that finance your studio, but also product funding that is becoming more and more popular among VCs, just funding your product, not your studio, and crowdfunding that you just mentioned as well. What should new indie studios go for and why? If you can give a short answer.
A new
indie studio, what should they go for? Which money should they go for? The publisher, the VC, the VC only invests in your project, or crowdfunding?
Crowdfunding is really hard. I think it's very inspiring, like what Raf Koster has just done with Star Realms. But for the most part, some bad players really kind of screwed up Kickstarter for us years ago. So I don't think that's what it was, but it does seem like it's a good metrics indicator. So I don't think it's about going after as much money as you can. It's about a really small goal, like what Raf did, and nailing it and proving that the player community cares and stuff like that. So I think you have to be very tactical about crowdfunding. But I think that there is an opportunity for angels and for early capital. I'm much more excited about than the later capital. I think there's some really good funds out there. One Up Ventures, Behold, and Pix Capital and a few other guys that just love games and really want to get involved early. I think that's great. I think angel money is great. And then I think publishing is great.
Okay. Nate?
It's interesting. I mean, when you look at, because I look at kind of the media and entertainment landscape, and if you said to a traditional media company, the only way you're going to make a movie or a television show is you're going to self-fund, which is effectively, or you're going to find someone to fund it, a studio to fund it for you, they'd look at you like you're crazy. I keep saying, I think from a financing, if you look at the category video game, it's the largest category within media, or one of the largest categories, and it's still going to keep going. So I don't believe we're in decline. But if you look at the financing, I call it, we're like in third grade math, and we need to get, bring in like basic algebra into this. And it's not as simple, and you see a lot of this, and part of it is, so film financing dried up because the models there have changed. So all those guys now are looking and going, oh, we can do slate financing. The models have to be different. You don't have the back catalog, but you do have games as a service provides different opportunities. But the fact that no one has really looked at it that way, I think it has to change. This industry, the opportunity is there. I think there are ways to fund it rather than just, hey, someone's either, I'm going to sell part of my company to fund my game, or I'm going to get a publisher to fund my game. There's got to be other sources of capital.
I agree.
And that's something we've been pretty active in looking at.
Cool. moving on to the next topic, which will be payment models. Today we have both premium games, subscription, free-to-play monetization, and ads, all working in different game genres. Will that change in the future? Which of these models will be more prevalent and on which platforms?
I think there's going to be a blend, and I think you're seeing that. You see this in mobile too, where everybody's looking at different models. I think mobile certainly has had some growth challenges, and part of it is because they're not competing just with other game companies; they're competing with TikTok and Instagram and just leisure time. So I do think you're going to see blends from my perspective, you're going to see blends. I think subscription got a lot of heat because Netflix and things, but I don't think subscription has really taken off the way I think people had hoped. And I do think, consumers are in a situation where look, if I play a lot of a game, I'm willing to pay, but if I'm not, I don't want to be just another service. And we're seeing this on the streaming. They call it the great unbundling, rebundling. we're all paying a cable toll. It's just now we're paying 5 different people. But if we look at the numbers, it's actually probably, and it's going to keep going up. We're probably going to pay the same. I think the question is on the subscription model. When early MMOs had the subscription model, there's different challenges with that. There's different expectations from the consumer. When you're in a subscription model, it's very hard to say subscription, oh, we're going on beta and just go with those folks. That's very different than free to play. Hey, we're putting this out. We're going to react. You just have different expectations. So I think we're going to see the blend.
Blend.
That's my final answer.
Blend. Final answer. The blend.
Interesting thing on the subscription thing, I was talking to Scott who used to run Tryon today about this, funny enough. And there's a really healthy model in having a small community that's loyal and pays. Like if you look at the MMOs, EverQuest still makes money. EverQuest 2 still makes money. World of Warcraft obviously is like the king of all of this. Rift still has players. City of Heroes still has players. And so we don't need 20 some odd billion people to play. If you could get 50,000 people to pay $15 a month, that's a nice business. And so I think we have to think about that. I think the industry is going to become a little bit more about niche subsets of the things that you love and you're willing to support. And I think that's really healthy. I think pricing has to come down. I think if you look at what's working on Steam, most of the games are $15, $20. Vampire Survivors, I think, was $5. And so I get really shocked when I see a $70, $60 game on Steam. I don't think games should cost that anymore unless they cost $300 bazillion to make like Grand Theft Auto. I get that. I get where the model is there. But if you don't need to spend that kind of money, I don't see how you command that sort of price, and I don't see how you justify that sort of price. Prices start to come down, then it works. What I really don't want to see is what happens in mobile happens to the rest of the industry. Like you see it with advertising. Steam had to come out and say they were going to have rules around advertising because they need to find somewhere to advertise. And Apple and Google have made that very difficult on mobile. They're going to have to go somewhere. I don't want ads in my Steam games. And so I think that a lot of bad things happened because of free-to-play years ago. It did good things. It expanded the market, got non-gamers into it. On the other hand, it made it so that even charging $1 for your game was suddenly absurd, Back in the day, you went from free to $1 and you went from 5 million installs to 500 installs if you were lucky. Like that was shocking and so bad in so many ways. I don't want to see that happen to the rest of the industry.
So, but I will ask though, because Dave, you mentioned TikTok and attention economy earlier, and I'm just going to put it out there. TikTok is free. If that's what you're competing with and they're free, can you really charge money for your game up front?
But if anything is free, it means you're the product.
Yeah.
So just remember that. TikTok isn't free. It's just we're the product. And so I do think that's important. But one thing you mentioned, you can have a good business, but the reality is this goes back to equity investors, which is very different than debt. Debt, it's all about the downside and how do they get the recoup, and it's less focused on the upside. It's making sure you're managing your risk. Equity is about the upside. If you're not growing, you're not having upside. Multiple, and this is, if there's one thing in valuation, the multiple applied to your EBIT, to your profits, to your EBITDA, to your revenue or whatever is a direct function of growth. And so that's really where, if you look at companies that struggle, or you look at any of the public companies and they're trading at low single-digit multiples, it's because look at their growth trajectory, and that's what the perception is, they're not growing. And so you can have a good business that's making money, but this goes back to the venture guys pushing, because they really, what they need is growth. Yeah. They don't need a flat business that's a good business that, you know, is profitable. They need it to grow because buyers covet growth too. So if you want the exit, you got to have growth.
So this is the problem, again, from moving away from publishers, because when I was a publisher, we were willing to take those sorts of risks. I signed Borderlands on a verbal pitch at E3 from Gearbox many years ago. That kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. It used to. And the thing with original IP, and I signed a lot of original IP in my career, is that there is nothing you can point to and say, here's the historics, it's going to do this.
Yeah.
You can't. That's the point of original IP, right? Is it's original. And so my fear is if the publishers don't have a role in this, those things aren't going to get signed. I think GTA 1 on paper wouldn't have got signed by a BC. You know, I think loads of these games wouldn't have gotten signed. So these franchises have to come from somewhere. And so maybe that's where the publishers come back in.
Maybe.
Taking risks, you know?
Yeah, the last topic to segue to that one is actually the getting your game seen, which is getting harder and harder today. I was recently presented at DevCon Leadership Summit with a couple of harrowing statistics that a lot of the streamers and content creators, they prefer the big titles, the big live service games that is now taking, you know, 70% or something of the revenue, because that's how they get the hits. And also of course, the media sites who are reporting about games are also needing those clicks and also favorizing said titles. But this hurts. This hurts new games, new game formats, new game ideas that could really revitalize our industry for the long term. And the question is, how do we break this?
I'm going to go back to the indie thing and say that my maybe controversial opinion on Steam, I know it's crowded, and they talk about, Dean would probably know the stats, 20,000 games come out on Steam a year or something like that. Now, that number isn't exactly accurate. A lot of that is fluff, isn't you know, specifically games catered towards gamers on Steam. But what's fascinating, and I learned this because it would have been a while since I'd done a Steam game until what I'm working on, is marketing doesn't matter on Steam. I don't know if everyone knows this. Ad spend doesn't matter on Steam. It is throwing money away to advertise your game on Steam. It's all about community. It's all about that magic. It's all about stoking that fire and building your community. Isn't that freaking wonderful? That means it doesn't matter if you're EA. It doesn't matter if you have millions to spend on marketing. If you do something really good and you nurture your community and you get it right, you can be Ballatrope and you can succeed. And I think that's amazing. And so I think that's what it's about. I think it's about quality. Suddenly, when it's really hard to make money, you better fucking believe in what you're building, because you're going to really struggle every step of the way. And if you don't love it and you don't believe in it, no one else is going to either. And like the fans certainly aren't going to believe in it. So I think it's about getting back to basics and just making great stuff. Great stuff will be found. Sorry. You got to fight against that now.
Well, I would say the counter to the open thing, I mean, the reality is if you looked at the console business before, when it was, you had the boxes and got on retail, you had to go through a publisher. They were the gatekeepers, but they controlled inventory, which meant it was less crowded. Your game, you could make that game and you could get it to the consumer to actually try the game and play the game. As opposed to a lot of these, I mean, I think someone was mentioning on the App Store, they're like, yeah, most people don't pay the 30%. The reality is they're not paying the 30% because no one's playing the games and they're not even hitting the threshold. And that's like the dirty little secret on that, right? So I think the trade-off is, the upside is you've got access and direct access. The downside is now you've got to figure out how to get there. And I think we've seen a lot of people said, oh, I'm just going to self-publish, I'll put it in. And what they realize is, no, it's actually a lot harder to do than what they realize. It's not just slapping up on Steam and seeing what happens. Yeah. You've got to really be, you know, you've got to take that over or get someone. Back to your point about maybe the publishers come in. I think publishers have to get better. If they're going to step in and take the toll, they've got to actually do the job to, you know, move the needle for the content creator.
100%.
I love that. All right. That was the third debate of the night. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, we have one question here in the front.
Cool.
Going the next generation is my son as well right now, and most of his cohort is on Roblox or Koi. How do funding approaches that at? Because right now the last news I heard was some I think was acquiring games inside of your cost. So is that where we're going? Is that into the ecosystem where we're heading off?
So the question is here then, Roblox is where, you know, the young generation, all the cool kids hang. And how do you acquire that audience?
It is a big problem that I've been talking about this week. Like, I've got a 16-year-old son who goes back and forth between Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite and just rinse repeat over the last 8 years. And, you know, and the other problem is Roblox knows they're not making enough money off of users. It's really hard to monetize kids that age. And it's sapping our industry in a place where we can't make money. And so it's really problematic. I don't know I wish I knew the answer to it. I think that people who are making Roblox games, like professionals, like that became a trend, right? The kids were doing it, now we're going to do it. We're going to make Roblox games. It's really hard to make money, I think, is what most of them have found out.
And it's really hard to compete against kids. There are
Kid things, because who know what they want, right? Yeah. So I wish I knew the answer to it. I don't know the answer to it. Do you know the answer to it there?
No, well, I would caution, it's anybody can write a check. It's a lot harder to receive a check. And so just because someone invests, it doesn't necessarily, and I'm not saying that it isn't necessarily saying this is it. I mean, I remember when all the money was chasing HTML5 games because, you know, everybody was trying to bypass the Apple Store, right? And we'll do this. And it really was challenging, you know, but that was like a trend. So you get this kind of trend. I do think there's a tension on the, you know, the real question is not even, so one, will that scale? But the second thing is, will your son, you know, will he evolve and will he move to more traditional games, or will he move in the creator economy? Like my daughter, the thought of her waiting once a week for some episode of a show is insane to her, let alone to sit in front of a TV, right? She watches what she wants, when she wants, how she wants, and that's just how it is. And so I think that's going to be a real challenge for, let's call it creators, is there's a whole new audience that may have a totally different expectation than, you know, what someone in their 30s or someone in their 40s have.
Cool. And UGC with that, clearly. Yeah. If we look at all three of those games, they're about letting users create stuff. And so I think if empowering players isn't part of your strategy, it's going to be risky. I'm not saying it can't be. There are going to be wonderful games coming out on Steam that have nothing to do with UGC, but I think it's really important to think about how you're giving your audience agency over the experiences that they're having, and shareability. You know, like why do I tell my friends about it? Like some of them, it blow my mind. Like some of the games that have grabbed the gestalts of 15-year-olds over the last few years, I don't get it. But it's all about these shareable moments and a lot of dancing. It seems like they always dance like, you know. Yeah, these extraction games with dancing. I'm like, seriously, they're dancing again. What is the appeal?
Battle Royale extraction game with dancing. That's the future.
And
I think that's the conclusion here of our panel.
Let me have one other thing though, which is,
Dancing
I think getting cross-generational teams together. I'm old. I'm 52-year-old. We're all, a lot of us are old. I can't possibly understand what someone half my age is interested in, but I know how to run a company. And I know how to hire people who are closer to that age. And so I think we have a responsibility right now as those getting older in the industry to help run these businesses and to bring in fresh talent and to empower them to create the things that they love.
All right.
Great. Thank you.